So Haley and Kassie, can you tell the viewers about you and also about your soccer journeys?
Yeah, so you want to go for it?
Yeah, go for it. You're on.
Cool. Yeah, so my name's Haley. I grew up in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. Played locally club soccer at Mustang in Danville, and then I went on to play collegiately at UC Berkeley, Cal Berkeley in California. And then I went and played professionally for 4 years in Europe. So first I was in Poland, which was a great experience. My first kind of intro to professional soccer and kind of playing at the highest level. And then I got to play Champions League in Serbia, spent 6 months there, went to play in France for 2 years, which was awesome, playing in the top league there, getting to compete against the best players in the world. And then I recently finished my career playing in Budapest, Hungary, where we also got to compete in Champions League. And now I work with female footballers, so still staying connected to the game that way. I've been involved in the organization for 2 years, so it's been a really great journey, both playing as well as kind of staying around the game.
And I should have gone second because that was so impressive. But my name is Kassie Gray, and I grew up also in the San Francisco Bay Area in San Jose. Excuse me. I played locally as well, club soccer, and also got a scholarship to play at UC Berkeley. I'm a lot older than Haley, so we didn't play together while we were there. And I was part of the generation that the first women's professional league had started. So I was training with the San Jose Cyber Rays, and unfortunately the league folded the year I graduated. So there wasn't another women's professional league to come around for 6 more years. So I hung up my boots. I played in the WPSL league for about 3 or 4 years, semi-pro. And then kind of hung up my boots and just played for fun and started Female Footballers in 2014, and have been plugging away on the mental side of the game ever since.
Soccer's changed a lot, and this is, I feel like, geared to Kassie, because when you started playing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, women's soccer was not as big as it is now. And so maybe you can go into that, because I feel like soccer's changed a lot since you started playing compared to now, where it's very accepted. You're seeing a lot more men at the games. You see men, and I believe this kind of started in 2011 at the World Cup when, the women's team really played well. They lost to Japan in the final, but Abby Wambach, that Brazil game, she scored that goal, and I believe it was double overtime in the FIFA World Cup. But that's when we started seeing men, I feel like, wearing those Abby Wambach, Alex Morgan jerseys now, and the games are fully packed all the time now. So can you talk about the growth in women's soccer since you started, compared to now?
Yeah, definitely. So I was kind of the generation right before the 99ers. I'm not that old, but I'm close. But what I noticed was I played ODP, the Olympic Development Program, and my coach was Brandy Chastain in 1998.
Oh, wow.
And so we would go to our region, which at the time was in Wyoming, every summer and do our kind of showcases for college coaches. And at that time, Brandy was kind of injured, and she was in and out of the national team after the 96 Olympics. And my generation, who I looked up to, was her, Michelle Akers, Mia Hamm, Julie Foudy. Those are all the women that were starting to come up. And I do remember being a young kid. My sister is 5 years older than me, and she had Alexia Lawless posters on her wall. By the time I came, within 5 years later, I had Mia Hamm on my wall. But then 99 hit, and I was in Wyoming for the ODP week that year, and Brandy was on TV, and it was so cool to have such a tangible person involved in that for me, and seeing that wow, these women are changing the face of our sport. But it was really just changing the face of the sport for girls at that time, young girls. So my generation got to watch, I was 16 at that time, getting to watch women play soccer on TV. That was a big deal for young girls. I would say what you're talking about in 2011, by then it's not just little girls, it's everybody. And I would say by 2015, even more so, 2019, even more so. For every World Cup, it is getting bigger, more broader, and the louder the voices within the sport, the larger it's getting. So 99ers were definitely, they were on the David Letterman show. They were on all the morning shows when they won. There were people paying attention, but by 2019 with Megan Rapinoe and the White House and all the politics involved, that garnered so much more for our sport. So it's definitely grown a lot. And I love getting to see that because my husband played professional soccer for 8 years in Major League Soccer. And so getting
wow.
to kind of watch the guys versus the girls at that time too, it was still a big difference. But I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, it's really shifted to be more, bigger on the women's side in America than the men.
So Kassie, you're saying when you started, the resources were a little bit better, obviously, than the 99ers. I've read books about, how they were treated. We even hear, and we've interviewed a lot of women from the NWSL within the past couple of years, and I know it's gotten better in the past, year or so, but it was really bad for there. There was some Gabby Seiler, who played on Houston Dash. She went to University of Florida. We've interviewed a couple times with her. She retired now, but when she was there, she had to work. She was working Orange Theory and also playing with the Dash. So these girls are working 2 jobs along with playing soccer, as far as that goes. So, can you talk about how the resources have changed since when you started around that time frame after the 99ers compared to now?
Yeah, so when I graduated, the WUSA was in their 2nd year. They weren't doing well. I was training with the San Jose Cyber at West Valley College. It was a junior college in San Jose. They didn't have any facilities. They didn't have a stadium. They didn't have locker rooms. So we were on a community college campus training. They got to use their locker rooms. They would play at this field that didn't even have stands. And then, so some of the girls I played at Cal with, they stuck it out for 6 years and waited for the WPS, which was the 2nd league. And those girls were living with host families, making 25 to 30 grand a year. They had to have a job or 2 extra. So part of the reason I didn't stick it out was you had to have multiple jobs. And after graduating college and going to Cal, I was like, I want to make money. I want to have a job, So some of the girls that stuck it out, I was proud of them. My college roommate was one of them. Her name was Kim Yokers. But watching that she was living with a host family because she couldn't afford rent, having to coach on the side, playing where she didn't have any resources as far as like healthcare, physical therapy, any of that kind of stuff. She was getting injured all the time. She hung up her boots and just had a really rough go there, then trying at a later time to get into the business world at 6 or 7 years out of college, then trying to get a job. Whereas, at that time they were still hiring the 22, 23-year-olds. So it was really rough. And I think the girls that stuck it out definitely saw, the glory of getting to say I played pro soccer, but it's not nice at all. And even my husband, who played early on in MLS, watching what they had compared to what the men have now. And like Haley's seen all of this on an international level too. It's not glamorous by any means, which is kind of why I never had the desire when that 2nd league came around to play, because I was already making good money in the corporate world,
So Haley, talk about the international, because as far as that goes and how they treated women's soccer. I know some leagues are really good and some are really rough. I interviewed a woman that played at UNC, and now she went overseas for a little bit, and she said that they were wearing hand-me-downs from the men's uniforms from that league, and it was total disaster. But then I interviewed one of the girls I'm friends with from the University of Florida. She graduated last year, and she's over in Finland, and she said she's getting treated like a queen over there and having a ball, and she loves it. So what was your experience playing in all these different countries overseas?
I would first say that it's a large culture shock for most people who play collegiately in the United States when they go over to Europe, especially if you played a Division I program where it's a multi-million-dollar athletic department and you have the very best facilities. You have we're spoiled in the United States in collegiate athletics. Obviously, there are downsides to being a college athlete, but overall, the facilities and the treatment and the staff that you have at your disposal, top notch. So when you go to Europe, where a lot of these clubs, if they're not associated with a men's team, you're going to have less resources because the revenue coming into the team is going to be lower. So that was an initial kind of shock to me going to Poland, where our team was the best in our league, but they did not have a men's club associated with them. So it was just them. Conditions were fine. I've never felt that like, oh, this is like the worst in the world by any means. But I think the big discrepancy for me was the lack of professionalism. I think we talk about the professionalism becoming more at the youth level, but I think in the NWSL and abroad, we see a casualness, especially in terms of coaching staff and the front office and how they treat their players. There's not as much respect, I would say, as I would hope there would be in other professions. So for example, in most places, I would not have my schedule more than a week out. I don't know how you're supposed to plan a life too much around that. So it's like, that's difficult. You're kind of at the beck and call of your team, which of course is what you're there for, but it's difficult to schedule doctor's appointments, have a life, and that kind of stuff. We'd find out we have training the next day very quickly. And that's different from the NCAA, just from they have to give you a schedule a month out because you have school and all that kind of stuff. And things like that. I mean, definitely had to deal with some sexual harassment related things with coaching staffs, not getting paid on time. So there's just a lot of different things. And I would say part of them in some of the countries I lived in was cultural. They're not as efficient as the United States in many regards. But I do think that professional women's sports, and I think beyond soccer, there's a level of casualness that it's not treated like if you were working in corporate America, where everything needs to be very structured and laid out, and there's an HR department. You don't really have that in a lot of these clubs. So that makes it difficult to kind of create a life and to have a sustainable career with all those kind of disorganized elements happening at the same time.
So I did my grad assistantship with the women's team, and I used to get this all the time by a lot of the kids that were at my college. It was Division II school over in Boca Raton, Florida. And I would say to the guys, why won't you go to the game? And they said, the women's game is too slow. It's boring. I only go to the game to see the girls because they're hot. And that was literally, I'm not trying to be sexist, but let's be truthful. And that's what a lot of these guys were telling me. And I said, it's freaking soccer. Who gives a shit? In plain English, like, who cares? It is what it is. If you like soccer, you like it. If you don't, then you don't. What would you tell these guys? Because there's a lot of these guys around, whether we like it or not, whether we want to call it sexist or not, it's out there. And this is all over college campuses. So what would you tell people that think like that?
I feel like I've gotten a lot of that in my time.
Okay.
So I got that question before, and I've seen it, and I've had friends that have said that. So I think it depends on what you value about the game. I think it's a very American thing to want an aggression out of a sport. We're, as a society in America, we're used to football, which is an aggressive sport. And we are like, our culture is about masculinity in sport. All of our sports that were professional forever have been men, and a lot of them have been more contact. In female soccer, it is less contact. It is more finesse. It is a little bit slower, which I don't have a problem with, but I think it depends on what you value in the game. Personally, I think women's soccer is better to watch because they can actually connect passes and build up a whole, throughout the whole field, and the touch is amazing in my opinion. And the technical skills, as we're seeing progress throughout time, like Tobin Heath is a great example of, it's getting better and better, but we're also incredibly newer compared to the men. Men have been playing for hundreds of years in this sport. We didn't have the opportunity to even play in college till 50 years ago. So we're seeing that we're going to continue to get better. But I think it's a cultural thing. But Haley, maybe you can speak to internationally if it's looked at that the same way over there too. I don't know.
Well, that's why I brought it up, because you just was speaking about how you were being treated overseas, Haley. So that's why I just kind of went into that, because we were already on that. But go ahead.
Yeah, I would say overall, I never really experienced anything like that. I think partially because soccer is such a cultural mainstay in Europe. It's the most important sport to everyone. I do think that women's sports in soccer are behind a little bit than in the United States, both developmentally. I mean, we're seeing other countries catch up in terms of level. Like the U.S. Women's National Team used to win every game by so many goals, and now we're seeing more competition, which is important because it means the game is growing. But I don't think that I've seen that too much, those comments or anything like that. Also, language barrier. I'm not going to be the person hearing it really if that does happen. But yeah, I don't really witness that as much. What I would say is I do think that women's soccer can be more aggressive at times. MLS, not so much, but compared to European soccer, we don't really have women flopping as much as the men do. Women are much more tenacious in some respects. And we see that, and at times not necessarily faster in ball movement, but I do think that at least in the English Premier League and kind of these European leagues, there's a lot more passing. There's a lot less contact because they are relying on kind of just ball movement, versus women's soccer can be more combative at times. But like Kassie said, I think it depends on what someone's hoping to get out of the sport.
Haley, I would hope that any guy would not say that to a woman, that they just go because the girl is hot and they don't go to the game
Well,
because the
to
game
that
is
point,
slow.
though, to that point, Rob, when I started female footballers, when you Google the word female footballers, the first like 10 listings are about the hottest female footballers. So it's, again, like having to change the image of women playing soccer. It's always been like that. So,
Well, let me ask you this. Oh, sorry, Haley, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's all women's sports. I think people say it about women's basketball. They say it about all sports, unfortunately. I don't think it's unique to soccer. I think it's a man versus woman thing, and men being more, they're the athletes rather than the women.
Do you think it's good for the sport that, someone is a great player like Alex Morgan, but she's really good looking, compared to, guys liking someone like that's maybe not as good looking? I don't want this to sound sexist. I'm trying to frame it in the correct way, but do you get what I'm saying? Like, people see Alex Morgan as a good soccer player, but she also can be viewed as a sex symbol, but she's bringing men toward women's soccer rather than having someone that's not a sex symbol, but they're a good player, and men don't come to the games now. You get what I'm saying? They're not buying
yeah,
the jerseys and that stuff.
yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think that's going to happen anywhere. Like you look at football, Tom Brady is super famous,
Right.
but a lot of people like him because he's a good looking guy. Like it's going to happen in any sport. I do think it happens more in women's sports because of the culture with men and women in
The
America. But I
sexism
do,
is there.
yeah, I do think that's a big part of it. But I also think like, the U.S. Women's National Team and women's soccer have always been very vocal about equal rights, equal pay, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
They're going to not like the women who are very vocal about that if you have a problem with those types of issues. So there's a lot of people that don't like Megan Rapinoe because she doesn't fit the pretty mold, or she doesn't fit that mold because she's talking about things that are real within our sport and our society. And some people don't want to hear that. Whereas Alex, by the media, was portrayed pretty young, straight out of Cal, as a pretty soccer player. And that's kind of the role she plays. I think it's inevitable that when, like I said, either male or women's sport, that the media is going to take a better looking person and make them the face of the sport. I think that's definitely an issue. But I personally think that's kind of something we don't always have control over within our sport. I don't know about you, Haley. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say that because Alex appears less polarizing,
Right.
she doesn't get kind of put in the hot seat as much, but she's fought for a lot of issues that people don't really know about. Maybe she's not as vocal, but she was very instrumental in reporting issues in the NWSL with coaching problems, with equal pay. She's been in all of those issues, but maybe not as vocal to the extent that Megan is. And maybe she is given a little bit of slack because she was that kind of pretty face of the thing, but her skills and her abilities back up everything. And I think now, maybe that 10 years ago, that was more of an issue, but I don't even see her being talked about as a hot soccer player anymore. She's just an incredible athlete who does great things on the field.
Can we talk about that big agreement that's been made about equal pay with U.S. soccer as far as that goes? And then we can touch on the NWSL after, but let's touch on that first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a step in the right direction. It's I would say it's years in the making. I was on the US Soccer Development Council since 2019, and at that time I was in a local like community group trying to raise money for women and coaching and all that kind of stuff. And then US Soccer had its COVID year and they lost a ton of money. And then with the Carlos Codiero stuff, they lost a ton of money. And so they had to take all this money from the different groups that we had all raised funds for and put it into the federation. And between that and sort of their stance on equal pay in the last few years, they definitely lost a lot of fans within the, within the organization, the federation. And so the most recent news is good news. I think having Cindy Parlow-Cone on as the president is helping us. I think she fights for the women's side big time. I'm a fan of hers, but they are still very far behind when it comes to funding the federation they need. They lost a lot of money from what I know. But as far as the CBA, I think is a big deal. I mean, Haley, you could speak more to that kind of stuff, I would say, than I can. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's a step in the right direction. It's important that that comes to fruition. I think that there are still like steps that need to be taken to make sure that that when that first paycheck goes out, that's when we know. I think that's the big thing. It's like we've reached an agreement, which is great, but we need to see it rolled out. And it is making up for a lot of lost time, because there are a lot of women who did not get to benefit from that hard work that they did leading up to now.
Well, let's kick this around, because I tell this to people all the time, with the fight for equal pay. I just think it's kind of hilarious, because the men's team, no offense to them, I follow the men's team, but they've been sucking pretty big lately. And the women's team is the one that's bringing all the cash and winning all these tournaments. So how is it equal pay again if the men are making more money than the woman, but they're not winning anything? And the women's team is making all this money selling jersey, merchandise, and winning all these tournaments. What would you say about that? I mean, why are people not thinking like that? I guess I should just say.
I would say that, well, that's kind of been the whole argument of the women this whole time. And now that that's kind of what they led with this collective bargaining agreement. And I think that's why it's been able to be passed. I think the argument for a long time, arguing women's versus men's sports, like, well, women don't bring in the money. They don't give us the revenue that we need. And now that they are showing that, yeah, they do bring the revenue, they do bring the fans and the viewership on television, that's kind of what allowed this big step to happen, is kind of showing that growth in the women's game.
Well, Haley, they don't put the games on TV. You can't find the damn games. Even the NWSL. Say again?
For the national team? For
the national team, for the, not the WPS, for the NWSL, you got to buy Paramount Plus. You got to have CBS Sports Network Plus. You have to have, even for the Gators games with the women's team, I tell them, I say, what's the game on? It's SEC Network Plus. You can't watch it on SEC Network. It's got to be the Plus, and you got to pay extra for that. So in a time we're in an economic crisis already, who's got the money to pay for Paramount Plus or CBS Sports Network if you don't have these, or SEC Network or Pac-12 and all this stuff? People can't pay for all these networks, and it's tough for them to watch games. They don't make it easy access. The game is not on ESPN, whether it's a college women's game or it's a even the men's game's on ESPN for the most part. But it's extremely, I'm talking about college, but it's very tough to watch a women's college soccer game or an NWSL game unless you have cable, or you got to go to Twitch. It's all kind of BS in plain English to me, that you can't just watch a normal damn game. And once in a while, they'll put a game on the regular CBS network as far as the NWSL goes. So it's a joke. It's really still a joke.
I agree. I do think the national team has much more exposure, and those games are easier to find now, in terms of the collective bargaining agreement and why that kind of equal pay deal could be made. But I do agree with you that the NWSL is incredibly inaccessible for American viewers to watch.
I'm sure, if you wanted to watch a Cal game, a women's soccer game, it's probably hot as hell to get. I don't give a damn if it's on the Pac-12 network or the Plus or whatever. It's tough to get these games because they're going to show the men's game, or they're going to show some football game that happened 2 years ago on a repeat that no one gives a damn about. I mean, this happens all the time. I see these stupid things that go on instead of the games that are live. So it's just a joke. But let's go into the NWSL. I told you my story. I've interviewed a couple of players on the Pride and also on the Dash, and Gators players that have played in the NWSL, and they're saying, it's gotten better. As far as the Kansas City team, they have their own stadium, they have their own practice facilities. Not every team has that. New York doesn't, but I'm sure there's quite a few other teams. You guys are in California. San Diego just got that team, and also LA having that team. I'm not sure where you guys are in California, but if you can kind of say what you're hearing from either players on these teams or just surrounding people that are around these teams of how these women are getting treated and how these organizations are built right now.
I think it's completely dependent upon where you play. And I think it's like that in the MLS too for the men. Having my husband had played for 5 different teams, and I can tell you all 5 of those teams were very different with, as far as stadiums and facilities and all that kind of stuff. It really depends on the city. And I think in California, at least, we are Angel City. Angel City is in LA. They have all the money in the world with celebrity backers. They get to play at the same stadium as LAFC. They have a budget for marketing, and LA is a really hard area to navigate when it comes to marketing because you have so many diverse populations within that city. They've done a really good job so far. Whereas San Diego, they're playing at a college campus. They don't have a stadium. They have some of the best players and the best coaching staff in all of NWSL. But again, it depends on the marketing budget and the facilities and all of that. And up here, we live in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's a whole push right now to get the NWSL to the Bay. That's what they're calling it. It's Brandy Chastain and Leslie Osborne and Allie Wagner and Danielle Slayton. They've been trying really hard to get a team here. But I know from firsthand, friends at the Earthquakes, where I live, San Jose Earthquakes, they don't want to partner and do a Quakes women's team like the Fire kind of has the Red Stars and the Fire all playing the same place. They don't want to do that because they're worried they're going to lose money. They don't want to have to build a second locker room and have facilities because they're going to lose money. And there's not a lot of financial backers to take on when they know they're going to have a pretty big loss to start, because you have to have a ton of money to start something like this. That's why Angel City is, like, in my opinion, the model of what they should have for every team. But that's pretty unrealistic with how young, and I say young, even though it's almost 10 years or so, it's still pretty young for the NWSL. When my husband played in MLS, he was within the first 5 or 6 years of I think MLS started in 96 with the Clash. He came on in 2001. And even then, it was the same thing. Every team was so different. He played for the Chicago Fire. They had amazing facilities. And he got traded to the Earthquakes. And the Earthquakes couldn't even keep a stadium. They had to push the whole team to Houston. And then we were in Houston at this college campus again. And back to the Earthquakes at a Santa Clara University campus. So even on the men's side in pro soccer, it's kind of like that. It's gotten better in the last 10 years. But it's early for NWSL to have those types of, that's why Kansas City is such a big deal, and Angel City is such a big deal, and even Gotham FC, I would say, is a big deal. They've got some good ownership behind them right now.
So can you talk about female footballers and how it came about?
Yeah, so like I said, my husband played pro soccer, and I kind of took a time away from the women's side for a little while to support his career. He retired. I had my oldest son, and I had a daughter, and we were out in the front yard letting her play around. She was like 18 months old. And I started to think about, like, what would soccer look like? It had been that long for me. What did the sport look like? Kind of went inside, started writing. I like to write every now and then. I was a journaler. Wrote like for 4 days straight, handed it to my husband, who's now an entrepreneur. And he looked at it and said, "Mal, this is like a business opportunity. Like this, you could really help a lot of girls." So in 2014, it started as clinics, and it was just kind of me and 2 friends that started it. We did local clinics, but my writing all had to do with the mental side of the game. I was noticing at that time in 2014 how many different organizations were coming up with teaching girls and stuff, the technical side. It was all private trainers, technical stuff. New innovative technology to help girls become better technically. And I was sort of bothered that nothing had come up from the mental side. So our clinics were, stations of technical, tactical, physical, and mental, kind of the 4 pillars of what we believe to be a whole player development style and a holistic approach. So we did that for a few different years, and then I had a 3rd kid, so it kind of was like up and down, but everybody kept coming back to me saying, there's something here, there's something here. So in 2020, I was like, all right, this is going to be the year that we're going to put a lot of my time into it, and then COVID hit. But I did a few different summits for America's Scores and some other organizations, and those kind of got bigger, and I started to get interest from a lot of these girls like Haley, like, hey, I watched your talk, I'm interested in what you do. And so our organization started to grow during lockdown, and we created content and courses, virtual courses for girls at that time. Unfortunately, when we had started to unveil all of them is when Zoom fatigue started to set in for young girls. They had already been on distance learning with school. So then we had to pivot. We started to do again in-person clinics again. And now we just unveiled a mentorship program where it's one-on-one, a Google Classroom, where girls can take a lot of our coursework, be paired with a pro or collegiate player at the same time, Zoom with them, go back and forth on the Google Classroom with them. And then simultaneously, we work with clubs in person and virtual to give our sessions virtually as teams or clubs. And then we're now branching out to do coaches sessions and parent sessions so that we can educate them on what whole player development is, some of the mental skills that we deem really important for girls 10 and up to learn, such as, confidence, motivation, self-care, normalizing the pressure and the struggle that girls are going through, giving them supports and avenues and resources to navigate the professionalization at such young ages. So it's a lot of it's customizable programs to work within everything within women's side, the youth side, I would say. Haley, did I forget anything? Yeah, so we're really, really passionate about it. It's growing. Unfortunately, like you mentioned earlier with the Stanford goalkeeper, I think that started a growth pattern for us as people are now seeing the crisis level that some players are hitting at the college level. That's a lot of what we're talking about is we don't want it to be where players get to that level and try to slap a Band-Aid on bad habits and learned behaviors throughout their time as a youth player. We want to hit it younger. If girls can navigate these, the technical side and the pressure at young ages to be so technically savvy and to, eat right and sleep right, and they're getting pressure at 10 for that, then they can, developmentally, they can, as an educator, I'm aware in childhood development background that kids at 10 can handle, learning about self-awareness. That's what we're not clinical psychologists here. We're not sports psychologists. We provide mentorship to players, and we do it with younger girls. We give them somebody to talk to, somebody with resources to give them that have been in their shoes. So a female player that has gone through what they're going through.
I think the mentorship is very important because you're having these girls talk to women that played, college or professional, regardless of that. And a lot of these big schools, they might have the sports psychologists, but the little schools, they don't have that stuff. We never had sports psychologists. I'm talking about it as a men's perspective at my college for soccer. And I know the women's team obviously didn't have anything for them. You had the trainer and you had the, 2 or 3 coaches, and that was about it. And if you didn't like that coach, then you were either talking to your friend, or your mom, or your dad, or somebody you trusted, and otherwise you were screwed.
And even like, a Katie Meyer situation at Stanford,
Right.
They have all the resources in the world for her, but it still didn't happen. And I think that's why there's got to be a little autonomy and ownership for younger girls to learn mental skills that will help them as they grow. And it's only on parents and coaches to really give them those supports at younger ages and value that they need it, that it's preventative, that it's only going to help them become a strong, competent person, that all the skills that we're teaching are life skills, that when they have that crisis, when they finish playing, that athletic identity issues that always come up when you transition from sports to the real world, they need to have those skills then too. So it's not just within the sport, but it's their life skills. And I think that the more we can teach at a younger age, the more they will grow with those skills, and it will help them as they navigate each avenue of sport and beyond. And I think that, just banking on one sports psychologist or even a team of people that are there at an athletic department at a college, that's not enough. We've got to give them more at younger ages.
You have all these mentors and obviously all these women that are working with all these girls. Can you talk about, and we don't have to use names, of course, but can you talk about 1 or 2 success stories that you've seen in the past few years with, one of the girls that maybe was shy, maybe had some sort of issue in general, and she had, she rose above it?
I
Yeah,
can
Haley, why don't you
speak
go first?
to a girl that I mentored probably 2 years ago now. Was dealing with issues of soccer, confidence related, but also in her life, just dealing with issues of identity and kind of figuring out who she was, and whether that was related to her as an athlete or just kind of her coming into her own, and being able to communicate with her coaches and her parents. A big thing that she struggled with was her parents were very overbearing, and we see that a lot with a lot of parents kind of getting very involved in the game, and it can make the girl not only lose confidence but not have the ability to advocate for herself and kind of defer to what her parent is saying. And after going through our curriculum and then me offering kind of my experience and advice playing at all levels of the game, also having parents and coaches, then how I effectively communicated with them, she was able to kind of self-advocate and tell her parents like, hey, like this is not really helpful how you're communicating to me right now, and kind of finding better ways to create a strong relationship with them related to her game within soccer. And that's a big skill. It's hard to stand up to people that you care about a lot and your parents, and there are such big influences in your life. And she was able to be more confident and more successful on the field because she could kind of develop that more helpful relationship for her playing career.
But let's end with this last question. So, what do you hope girls get out of this interview today?
I think if anything, well, one, I hope they go to our website and check us out. But I also think they need to know what's out there. I think I was that player, and I was also from a generation where we didn't have the resources these girls have now, but that they use the resources put in front of them, because there are so many more now than ever, resources for every avenue of the sport, and to look at soccer in a larger frame of just a larger way. Like, I think, like you just said, a lot of parents even see like the narrow path to the college scholarship. It doesn't need to be like that. There are so many different paths to take to get to the top. And unfortunately, a lot of the stories that are told to the best players, they're always the players that maybe did take that specific route, but there are so many players that didn't. And Haley is a great example of playing professional all over the world in a way. And I think that so many people in America just think NWSL, NWSL. And Haley had an amazing experience living in different countries, and the growth that she had personally, I think, is a great testament to what our sport can provide. And a lot of girls don't know their options internationally. Outside of the traditional pro world, we have pro beach players, pro futsal players. Like, there's so many different ways to play pro, to play beyond college, to play at different levels of college, just looking at bigger picture.
Yeah.
How about you, Haley?
Yeah, I would just say to think about the mental side of the game a little bit, especially at a younger age. If we can start to develop these skills and habits from a young age, the stronger we'll be to deal with adversity in the college setting. I'm always talking about how everyone who plays on a college team, you were the best on your club team, and now you're all together. And that can be a difficult transition, transitions from club to college, college to pro. That's when those kind of mental training and habits really kicks in. So starting to think about tools and ways to maintain your confidence, and to practice self-care, are all very important if girls are hoping to progress to higher levels of the game.
Femalefootballers.org. Definitely check it out. And also the podcast. Definitely check it out. Can you just give a quick tease on the podcast before we end?
Yeah, we would meet every week during COVID and just talk about these issues, and we realized, why are we not recording these? So it started off as just sort of us talking about issues within the sport, current events, and now it's kind of growing too to interviewing different people and different parts of the sport that we find value in. So, for example, recently, Haley, our latest issue last week was about disability in sport, different avenues that don't always get the attention they deserve. We've talked about, normalizing the struggles, the pressures. We've talked to coaches. We even talked about to an expert in menstruation within sport, which is something nobody wants to talk about because it makes them uncomfortable, but it's a huge part of the sport on our side. We've interviewed directors of coaching in big clubs. So just trying to get a lot of different perspectives and showing all the different avenues that affect the mental side. So yeah, definitely listen to it. It's fun.
So thanks so much, Kassie and Haley. I really appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you down the road.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for having us.